After 20 years of Halloween films, Jamie Lee Curtis finally came back to the franchise in 1998. We're going to talk about that film right now. Let's get into it. Back to my channel. Hope you're all doing well out there. Today we're going to go back and talk about a sequel I've already talked about in the Halloween franchise, but I figured with the anniversary, the 24th anniversary of this film just happened about a week and a half ago, let's go back and re-examine this film. And that film is Halloween H20. Now, before we get into this review, like, comment, subscribe, join me here, would appreciate that. This film dropped August 5th of 1998. I saw this twice in movie theaters, once with my friends on opening night, and then later in the week I saw it with the girl I was dating at the time. And this was a big deal. Everybody's excited. Jamie Lee Curtis was coming back to the franchise. Now, after Halloween 6, the not so stellar reviews and the middling box office of that film, I mean, that film made a little bit of money, but it was not the success that Dimensions or Mustafa Akkad had hoped for. There was a lot of uncertainty with the Halloween franchise. They weren't sure if they wanted to continue the Thorn storyline or drop it and go off into a different direction. Well, the plan was Dimensions had brought in a writer named Frank Zappia to write Halloween 7, but their plans were to send it direct to video. Now, that was what Dimensions did with a lot of franchises, Mimic, Hellraiser, just to name a few. But around this time, Jamie Lee Curtis noticed that the 20th anniversary of the film that gave her a career, 1978's Halloween, was coming up. And she contacted Mustafa Akkad and Dimensions and said, hey, why don't we do something special for the 20th anniversary? Let's make a really good sequel and give the fans one last really good movie in the Halloween franchise. Because this was thinking, Jamie Lee Curtis, her plan was this was the last one in the franchise. And the way it ends, and we'll get to it, kind of leaves that door open, although Mustafa Akkad had other plans, unfortunately. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So they said, yes, let's do it. And they wanted to bring, Jamie Lee Curtis wanted to bring back Deborah Hill and John Carpenter. They wrote the original film, and John Carpenter directed that original 1978 classic. Deborah Hill didn't come back either, but John Carpenter, now, there's a rumor, or there's word out there that John Carpenter asked for too much money, $10 million, because he felt stiffed by not getting his payday for how much the franchise has made up to that point. Carpenter in interviews has said, no, they asked me, but I said, no thanks, good luck to you, but I'm not interested. I don't know what's true. I mean, Carpenter's usually very blunt about things like this. I know he did Vampires, he directed Vampires, that came out that Halloween after this dropped in August, so who knows what's true, but Carpenter did not come back. Now, they brought in a filmmaker that Jamie Lee Curtis had worked with before on Forever Young in 1992 with Mel Gibson and her starring in it, and that filmmaker is Steve Miner, who is no stranger to horror films. He directed Friday the 13th Part 2, Friday the 13th Part 3, he did House, he did Warlock. After this, he went on to do Lake Placid, so he was no stranger to horror, and Jamie Lee Curtis had worked with him once before. Now, they had the script by Frank Zappia. He rewrote the script to fit what they were going for, but then they brought in Kevin Williamson, hot off of Scream 1 and 2, to do an extra pass on the script and be a producer on the film, because Kevin Williamson is a huge Halloween fan. Now, Jamie Lee Curtis came back to play Laurie Strode, or Carrie Tate, the headmistress of this posh, secluded school in California. Josh Hartnett made his theatrical debut as her son John, and he also filmed this and Faculty back-to-back, and I really like the Faculty as well. Michelle Williams plays Molly. She is John's girlfriend in this film. She also goes to this little school in the mountains of California, and she was going into Dawson's Creek fame around this time. Janet Leigh shows up as Norma. She's a secretary, and this is the first time her and Jamie Lee have been on screen together in quite some time. Ella Cool J plays Ronnie, the security guard at this school. Nancy Stevens came back to Smoking Nurse from the first two films, and we see her right in the beginning of the film. We'll talk about her in a second. And Chris Turan was brought in to play none other than Michael Myers. Now, armed with a $17 million budget, that August when it came out was only an hour and 26 minutes long, which is in this film's one of the positives of this film. And upon release, it did really well. It made $55 million in America and $75 worldwide. So this was a huge hit and put Halloween back on the map. And unfortunately, that only incensed them further to make Halloween Resurrection, which is a huge steeping pile of dog shit. But I've already reviewed that one. I don't like that film for multiple reasons. Continue on with the story. Very simple story. They went back to basics of this film. They set this film up nicely. I love the opening of this film. We see the smoking nurse, or Nancy Stevens, come home from work. She's still smoking, and she's still a nurse. And she notices that her front door is ajar. So she goes next door. This is where we see Joseph Gordon-Levitt in his small role in the beginning of this film, and his buddy. And she tells him to call the cops because she thinks her house is broken into. Jimmy, who's Joseph Gordon-Levitt, calls the cops, but he decides to go over to investigate. He goes into the house by himself, and his office is ransacked, which we find out very shortly was Dr. Loomis's office, because Nancy Stevens has been taking care of Loomis during his life. He stayed with her, and she took care of him and looked after him, and his office was ransacked. Now, the boys go back to their house to drink beer that Jimmy stole out of the smoking nurse's refrigerator, and she goes in the house, and this is where we know the shape is lurking. Although this is a Halloween movie, so we know the shape's around. So she runs back over to Jimmy's house, walks in, and Jimmy's sitting rocking in a recliner with an ice skate jammed in his face. And she goes around out the back door, and his friend has a butcher knife in his back and falls on him. And then Michael makes his triumphant return with his first appearance on screen, wearing the Halloween 6 mask, which we're going to talk about that fucking mask in a little bit, because that's one of the negatives of this film, which was a negative for a lot of Halloween fans. Nancy struggles. She fights off Michael, but for her troubles, she gets her throat sliced. Michael steals the car and starts driving to California because he has what he needs to find Laurie and finally kill his freaking sister. And that is basically our setup for Halloween H20. We are reintroduced to Laurie Strode through a nightmare. We see the closet from the original film. We see footage of Michael smashing into the closet. She wakes up screaming, and that's when we meet her son, John, played by Josh Hartnett, who comes in, wakes her up, comforts her, and gets her some medication. And it's Halloween today, and he knows, he's one of the only people at the school that know his mother's backstory and with the trauma she suffered. And we come to find out she's the headmistress of this little school in the mountains, but she's also a functioning alcoholic, and there's not one day that goes by that she doesn't think about that Halloween night back in 78 where she had to fight for her life and her friends were butchered by her brother. And that is basically the setup. Michael is stalking around. We see this bathroom scene in Colorado on his way to California. That scene's all right. They did it way better in Halloween 2018, but it's an all right scene with a little bit of a scare for his mother and a little girl. Michael shows up. These kids are going off. Most of the school's going off on this camping trip to Yosemite, but Josh Hartnett's character, his other friend, and his girlfriend and Molly stay behind because they want to have a nice romantic Halloween and celebrate together as friends. And that's when shit really hits the fan, when Michael tricks Ronnie, gets into the school, and starts killing people. And we have our final showdown between Laurie and Michael, and we get that spectacular fucking ending that they ruined with Halloween Resurrection, because we got to keep it going, baby, because it made a lot of money, where Laurie pins Michael gets pinned against a tree with a van, and Laurie chops his head off with an axe in a glorious, I remember people clapping and cheering at the end of that in a packed theater on opening night when I saw this, with a spectacular ending, and Laurie's just standing there with the axe in her hand. She closes her eyes. We hear the Halloween score come up, and that's the end of Halloween H20. What to like about this film? Well, the runtime, so an hour and 26 minutes long, and that's with credits. It's really only like an hour and 21 minutes long. That is the major positive of this film. They don't mess around. They get right to the meat of the story. They tell their story. They get on to the carnage, and they get out. And I got to appreciate that. Steve Miner keeps the pace moving here, and that is definitely a big positive for this film. Bringing back Jamie Lee Curtis, I think she's really good as Laurie Strode or Carrie Tate here. They show her suffering with PTSD from that night. She still thinks about her brother and the horrors that she witnessed. She's a functioning alcoholic, and she runs this school, and nobody knows who she is besides John. And she has a boyfriend played by Alan Arkin that's the counselor for the school. But even he doesn't know. She makes the confession to him Halloween night when they're spending this quiet time together before the shit really hits the fan. I think the cast here is pretty good. You got Josh Hartnett in his first film role, and he's good here. He is good here. He's also good in The Faculty, and I always like Josh Hartnett as an actor, and this is where he got his start. This is in The Faculty, and he's good here. He does a good job as John. Michelle Williams is good here. LL Cool J is good. He's definitely way better than what we get in Halloween Resurrection. I mean, I always liked LL Cool J as an actor, and he's way better than Busta Rhymes. Busta Rhymes sinks Resurrection, amongst other problems with that film, but my God, trick or treat, motherfucker. You look a little crispy there. My God, you know how they said in Halloween Kills, evil dies tonight? Well, when I saw Halloween Resurrection in the theater, a little bit of my soul died that night. That's what that's what it should have been the tagline for that film. Your soul's going to die tonight watching this shit. So all those things are good and positive. The pacing, I think there's some cool kills. the ending kicks ass with Laurie chopping Michael's head off, for giving that character the retribution and be able to overcome her demons like that was spectacular. And then he had to fucking ruin it with Halloween Resurrection, but that's neither here nor there. We're talking about Halloween H20. Again, the acting, the pace, everything works well. One of the negatives is the big elephant in the room is the fucking mask. Now, in the beginning of the film, when Michael makes his first appearance, when Jimmy's friend falls on top of Nancy Stevens and she's trying to get away, when Michael turns the corner and makes his big triumphant return to the big screen, that's actually the mask from Halloween 6. You actually get to see almost every mask made for this film during this film. They were going to reuse the mask from Halloween 6. And the Halloween 6 mask is pretty damn good. It's way better than Part 4, and it's an upgrade from Part 5. Now, John Carl Buechler and his guys made that mask for Part 6. They did the special effects for Part 6. So they were going to reuse that mask. But they also commissioned a mask from KMB, which you can see briefly of it. If you ever watch the documentary, they show it. That mask absolutely sucks. I don't know who approved it. I don't know who told KMB to make that mask. And KMB is a really good effects house, but that mask is dog shit. Then they commissioned Stan Winston and his crew to make a mask as well. I don't know how a movie with a $17 million budget back in 97 when they shot this film could have this many problems with a fucking mask. Now, they had problems in Part 4. That mask is not great. Part 5, the mask was better. KMB did that one and the effects. Still not my favorite. Halloween 6 was better. Definitely way better than 4 and 5. This one is a shit show. It's all over the place. Like I said, you see this Part 6 mask briefly in the beginning. Then we get that goddamn CGI mask where when that kid has his hand in the garbage disposal and we think Michael's going to show up and turn it on. And he turns around and gets startled. That's a CGI mask. Looks absolutely awful. Oh my God, terrible. I don't know what they were thinking. And then the mask they end up settling for, I don't know if that was Stan Winston's mask or not, but none of the masks besides this Part 6 one, which you only see for 2 seconds, are any good. That's the one big elephant in the room and the one big negative with this film, the goddamn mask. I don't know why they always had a problem with the freaking mask. I know they rectified that in 2018, although I think Rob Zombie's mask was pretty damn good. Wayne Toth doing that mask did a really good job with that one as well. And in Halloween 2018, they did a really great job with that mask in Halloween Kills. But this movie, the mask is all over the place. I think the Weinsteins had something to do with the trouble on set with that. I think the movie's too brightly lit in scenes. Steve Miner does a decent job with the directing, and the cinematography is fine, but I just think it's too brightly lit in scenes. Like, I don't know, it's just overly lit for my taste. I know they were trying to replicate Carpenter's style from the original, and they even say it in the documentary they're trying to make it like Carpenter's movie. I don't think they quite got there, but I appreciate there's a lot of steady cam shots, a lot of fluid movements down hallways. I love all that stuff. I just think it's overly lit. I think there's some plot holes. How did Michael know Laurie or Carrie Tate stayed at the goddamn school when all the buses left when he showed up? These are questions you can forgive because we're having a good time and it's such a short run time. Overall, I think this is a pretty damn solid Halloween sequel. Now, they ruined it with Halloween Resurrection by that dumbass explanation with the frickin' EMT that goes in prematurely and gets his larynx crushed by Michael. Doesn't explain the fact if it was the EMT when that van slammed into him and pinned him against the tree, he would have been deader than dog meat and not be able to reach for Laurie and make movements. But that's neither here nor there because that movie sucks anyway. But overall, this is a solid return to form for the Halloween franchise. Not as good as the original film, but I think it's definitely a step up in quality, and it's definitely better than the Resurrection that came after this. Cool little Easter eggs. The girls, when they're there waiting for the counselor and Carrie Tate to be alone, are watching Scream 2 on the TV. Charlie, there's 2 references to Psycho. When Norma is talking to Carrie outside before she leaves for the day, she's standing right next to the car she drove in Psycho. And then Charlie, the one friend, makes the reference where, you're going to be living with your mother and still in 20 years, probably running a motel in the middle of nowhere. That's also a reference to Psycho. And originally, there was a draft of the script where Charlie, the one friend who dies, Michael kills him, was actually going to be a copycat murderer, and he was going to be the killer for part of the film before the real Michael actually shows up. I found that quite interesting. I wonder what that script would have been if they actually could have made that film. I think this was probably the better way to go, connecting it just to the original 2 films. But overall, this is still a very solid film. I've always enjoyed it. It's not perfect. It's not my favorite Halloween film, but at the end of the day, I would give this one a 7 out of 10. It's a brisk watch. It's a fun watch. Yeah, 7 out of 10 for Halloween H20. What are your thoughts on this film? Leave a comment down below. Let me know. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe button, share this video. I would appreciate that. I'll be back soon with some more horror reviews, but until then, bye.